Have you fallen into an open manhole recently? Do you find yourself in the company of strangers? Well, then you might very well be in the feature Underground. The undisputed lightweight champion of film criticism, my name is Hunter Lanier, and I am here today with a review of The Smashing Machine. This is the first film written and directed by Benny Safdie without his brother Josh, who himself has a movie coming out later this year in Marty Supreme. In the same way that I felt uniquely qualified to review A Complete Unknown last year, being a huge Bob Dylan fan, I too feel uniquely qualified to review The Smashing Machine. I say this because I have to be one of the few film critics out there that watches the UFC every single Saturday. And I have to be, in turn, one of the few UFC fans that respects Ernst Lubitsch as much as I respect Anderson Silva. So The Smashing Machine has two of my most disparate interests colliding in this unlikely and often beautiful way. Based on the documentary of the same name, The Smashing Machine follows roughly the first half of Mark Kerr's MMA career. Mark Kerr, one of the pioneers of MMA, which, if you didn't know, didn't even exist as a sport until the 90s. That is, the 1990s. He is such a great subject for a combat sports film because he is built like the Incredible Hulk, but has the voice of an elementary school counselor. There is this gentle heart beneath the layers and layers of muscle, as well as a thoughtful mind. He is both a stereotype and shatters stereotypes. And the same could be said for the movie as a whole, which exists in this happy medium between the saturated moodiness of John Huston's Fat City and the human interest story of Rocky. Speaking of rocks, The Rock, or Dwayne Johnson, I don't know which he prefers these days, is very good in this movie. I think he's helped largely by the fact that the film sticks very closely to the documentary, going so far as to recreate scenes word for word. As with fighting, this has given The Rock a lot of tape study for which to base his performance. For example, early on in the film, there is a scene where Mark Kerr is in this waiting room earnestly explaining the UFC to a skeptical old lady. This is almost an exact replica of a real moment from the documentary. And I don't blame Safdie for sticking so closely to the documentary because there is so much great material there. And not taking anything away from The Rock, but by having so much of his performance already on film, and by having so much of this movie being very close replications of the scenes from the documentary, it's a little more like The Rock is tracing rather than starting from a blank page. One double-edged decision that Safdie makes in this movie is that he fills it with non-actors. This is something the Safdie brothers have done before, and I think it adds a lot of value to a movie. It adds this subconscious realism because real people just have different faces and energies than career actors. Where it backfires in The Smashing Machine is that Safdie casts Ryan Bader in a very large and important role. If you don't know, Ryan Bader is not an actor. He is a fighter. He used to be in the UFC, then he was the heavyweight champion in Bellator for a while. Bellator is a smaller promotion than the UFC, but he is not an actor. And as it turns out, he doesn't have a lot of natural acting ability either. He would have been great in a small part because he has that topographical fighter's face, but he's not able to carry this big role of playing Mark Coleman, whose friendship with Mark Kerr is one point of the love triangle that is central to this film. Bader's wooden performance, it dulls this pivotal point of that love triangle. The other point in that love triangle is much sharper, and it belongs to Dawn, who was Mark Kerr's girlfriend at the time, and is played in the film by Emily Blunt, with all of the range that you would have liked to have seen the Mark Coleman character played with. She's a great character because she doesn't just represent a single facet of Mark Kerr's life. She isn't just shelter from the storm. She isn't just the voice of reason. She isn't just the devil on his shoulder. She is all of those things. So it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that the relationship between Dawn and Mark and their scenes together are really where the movie goes wheels up and takes flight. Although we do see many fights in the movie, from Mark Kerr's tenure in the UFC to Pride, the real fights in the movie happen not in the ring or the octagon, but in the kitchen and the living room. These are the film's main events. The actual tournaments are the prelims. To the extent that the MMA fights play a role in the movie, it's really just to accentuate the Mark Kerr's emotional state at the time, and to drive home the idea that this is a film ultimately about pain and how one chooses to confront pain, a necessary ingredient of life. After all, we enter into this world by way of the incredibly painful act of childbirth. And many of us will exit this life through painful means. Don't shoot the messenger. My point is that pain is with us, and you can either run from it or you can run through it. And I think the point of the Smashing Machine is that the latter leads to far greener pastures. While the Smashing Machine doesn't reach its full potential, largely, in my opinion, because of that Coleman friendship not quite coming off of the screen in the intended way, which leaves the story with this noticeable limp, I do think it's safe to say that The Smashing Machine is the greatest MMA movie ever made. Though that is an admittedly low bar, MMA films up until this point have largely perpetuated the dumbest aspects of the sport and targeted the lowest common denominator of the fan base. The Smashing Machine does the opposite. It zeroes in on the human beings behind all of the macho chest thumping, the sexy ring girls, and all the tacky branding. One of the reasons I was drawn to MMA, someone who is mainly just interested in stories, whether those stories come from movies, from books, from music, from video games, what have you, is the characters of MMA, the fighters. Because they're not like pro baseball players. They're not like pro football players. They are a strange bunch. On a single fight card in the UFC, you could have a convicted criminal, a redneck flat earther, a Czech samurai, a Brazilian Uber driver, a former heroin junkie, a Cameroonian who spent his childhood in sand mines and escaped to France. For a writer, the pool of UFC fighters is like shooting fish in a barrel if you're looking for a story. And finally, a film appreciates how interesting these people are. It should be obvious to anyone familiar with the strong lineage of boxing films, which have a pretty wide lead in terms of best sports films. The Harder They Fall, Fat City, Raging Bull, $1 Million Baby. These are among the greatest films ever made, in my opinion. And let's not forget about Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, which has one of the very best boxing scenes ever filmed. There's just something deeply human about combat that you don't find in other sports. There is nothing more relatable, in my opinion, in all of sports than watching a man get the snot kicked out of him and not being able to do a damn thing about it, no matter how hard he tries. If you can't relate to that feeling yet, you will eventually. That brings me to my last point, which is going to involve spoilers. So if you don't want to know how the movie ends, please flee now. This is your last warning. Spoilers are rapidly approaching. The film ends with this poignant moment where a film crew has snuck up on the real Mark Kerr in the present day while he's on a routine grocery shopping trip. Kerr notices the cameras at some point and chuckles nervously as he tries to ignore them, but is unable to. Normally, I find endings like this that involve the real people, the subjects from the film, to be corny. But this one is different because it is thematically relevant to the movie itself. Through the film, we come to fall in love with Mark Kerr as this soft-hearted hero and villain of his own life. Then we see him living out this existence no less ordinary than the guy who spent his life working in a cubicle rather than an octagon. Kerr isn't getting recognized like a retired Joe Namath might be. He's not living off of the spoils that an ancient warrior of his size and skill might be. He's just a regular guy, driving an F-150, wearing flannel, buying bananas, blending in with the crowd. This adds a retroactive meaning to the film that pushes the needle a little closer to Fat City than to Rocky. Kerr was fighting at the highest levels of MMA at the time, but it was before there was money in the sport. It was before there was fame in the sport. It was before there was respect. MMA wasn't viewed as a sport or an art or a skill, but as some bloody carnival freak show for savages, barely more respectable than doing porn. So for all of his struggles in the film, you never get that traditional payoff. Simply coming out of the other end, relatively unscathed, to live a normal life is viewed as a happy ending. In the same way that the characters in Fat City are these lonely, forgotten men who feel unnoticed and unfulfilled, there is this great irony in seeing Mark Kerr just go through his mundane day-to-day, free from personal demons perhaps, but now without a fight and without the spoils of victory. The ending is almost too peaceful to be a happy ending as it might have been intended to be. I was left wondering, watching this bashful Mark Kerr as he delivers his empty basket into the basket section of the parking lot like a true mensch. I was left wondering if he was truly happy or if there remained something missing. Well, those are all my thoughts on the Smashing Machine. Now is the time for you to let me know your thoughts on my thoughts. Next up, I have been sitting on this review of If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You for a long time. I saw it at Fantastic Fest last week or 2 weeks ago. I can't remember now. But I would like to get a review of that out sooner rather than later. I believe next week I am also seeing Frankenstein and Blue Moon, the new Richard Linklater movie. So those are all coming at some point or another. Until then, I remind you, as I always do, as I always will, of the greatly satisfying knowledge that every day underground is a good day.